Welcome to Medmarc's webinar series. Today's presentation is titled mRNA Patent Wars Update, Litigations Expand, and Key Rulings Expected in 2025. I'm Zahal Reed, Senior Staff Attorney in Medmarc's Risk Management Department. On behalf of Medmarc and today's presenter, Dan Shores, thank you for joining us. Dan Shores is a partner at Rothwell Figg and founder of its Boston office. He serves companies operating in dynamic biotech and other markets building patent portfolios, litigating complex patent disputes, negotiating strategic collaborations, and conducting due diligence and landscape investigations. Dan has served companies utilizing the following technologies without limitation: mRNA, lipid nanoparticles, CAR-T, oligonucleotides, genetically engineered swine organs for xenotransplantation, artificial intelligence for drug discovery, small molecules, biologics, material science, and numerous other technologies throughout his 20-year career. Dan has a BS from the University of New Hampshire and a JD from the Georgetown University Law Center. He is a registered patent attorney licensed to practice before the United States Patent and Trademark Office and is admitted to practice law in Massachusetts and the District of Columbia. He is a member of the bars of the Supreme Court of the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts. With that, I'm pleased to turn things over to Dan.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity that Medmarc has provided today in order to provide an update on the mRNA lipid nanoparticle litigations that are currently very active, particularly here in the United States, but also abroad. I think we covered my background. Feel free to check out my firm's website if you want to learn more about me. I'm very passionate about I'm very passionate about the life sciences space, and I've been working in this space for about 20 years, and I just love working with innovative companies. I especially have really a really strong affinity toward companies that operate in the intracellular therapeutic space, including mRNA, LNP, ADC, and other spaces. So it's very exciting, exciting work, incredible people, and I really enjoy it. Rothwell Figg has a really top tier life sciences team, and here's a group of attorneys, my colleagues, that I routinely work with on mRNA and lipid nanoparticle matters and other matters as well. And I can't say enough about the members of our team, and incredible people, and that are also PhD scientists and engineers. And we work on a lot of really cool matters together, and I wanted to give them some recognition here. So for some of those who are attending today's webinar may be very familiar, may be intimately familiar with mRNA technology, lipid nanoparticle technology. Some others may not be. So in any event, I wanted to sort of briefly walk through what the sort of key components are of a lipid nanoparticle, because it will become relevant to what I will be speaking about during this talk, relevant to what the various patent litigations are focused on. I think the sort of standard, or the like, if you take the vaccines that Moderna has Spikevax, and Pfizer and BioNTech's Comirnaty vaccine, we use those as an example. Each of those vaccines utilize a 4-component lipid nanoparticle to deliver a messenger RNA payload into a person's cell, and when the mRNA payload enters into the cell, the machinery of the cell reads the mRNA payload and produces the characteristic spike protein that the coronavirus possesses, and thereby invokes an immune response in the body to that particular spike protein, and therefore, when an individual is infected with uh, the actual COVID-19 virus, the idea is that your immune system has been built up to defend against that virus, and it's not an uncommon general concept. It's actually what the traditional vaccines are based on as well, except those vaccines are based on a um, a virus that has actually been grown and killed and then injected into the body and invokes the immune response. So that's sort of how it functions, very generally speaking, how the technology works for the COVID-19 virus. But this technology can also deliver any number of payloads into a cell in order for the cell to essentially create any number of proteins for a therapeutic or a prophylactic purpose. And so it sounds sort of, I guess, I don't want to say simple, but in concept, uh, engineering a messenger RNA sequence, so the cell can read it and produce a protein. That part is, I want to say simple, but you can sort of see that a big, huge challenge over really decades was how do you get the mRNA into the cell? It's a little challenge there. How are you going to get this, which is a very fragile molecule, the mRNA? If you were just to inject an mRNA molecule, naked mRNA molecule into the body, it would disassemble. The humans' bodies are, biochemistry would destroy it very quickly. So lipid developers developed this really, I would say, the 4-component LNP system. And the lipids that are a part of that 4-component, traditional 4-component LNP system include ionizable lipids, conjugated or PEG lipids, cholesterol, and phospholipids. And those lipids combine to surround and protect the RNA or other cargo. When it comes to the patent litigations and a lot of the innovation and patents that surround the aspects of this technology, patents can cover ionizable lipids. There are patents to compositions of matter for the specific ionizable lipid, patents that are directed to the payload, the RNA sequence, modified sequence. There are patents directed to that composition of matter. There are also patents that are directed to the overall formulation of the various lipid components. There are the 3 other components. Conjugated lipids certainly are subject to patent protection and increased innovation. Their litigations currently do not involve any claims relating to the composition of matter for conjugated lipids, but I do highlight that conjugated lipids are certainly patentable subject matter. They're lipids that are engineered and improved, and you do see a lot of patent filing trends increase in those filings relating to conjugated lipids. Cholesterol and phospholipids are, off the shelf. Patentability for or the patent activity surrounding those two, modifying cholesterol, for example, modifying phospholipids. You haven't seen a lot of that. Probably does happen to some degree, but that they're more sort of off the shelf, as to a large extent the conjugated lipids, just not as much as the cholesterol and phospholipids. So that's sort of what we're dealing with when you're thinking about what is the technology at issue, sort of how do the how does it, why does it come together, why do we have these, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish getting the mRNA into the cytoplasm of a cell so the cell can read the cargo and produce a specialty protein, essentially making your own body into sort of a specialty protein factory. It's quite a story, mRNA and lipid nanoparticles. It's really quite a story. For those of you who are in a startup company that has a technology that is unproven, it really, you could relate to this. I think a number of startups that are, or even if a company is operating in a new space, and an established big pharma company, but is operating in a new space, but that technology is unproven, you're sort of living on a dream, right? You believe in the technology. There are people and investors that are, everyone sort of believes and is behind this technology. But the challenge is it ever going to be translated? Is it ever going to get into the clinic in the first place? Is it ever going to get out of the clinic to become a therapeutic that actually helps people? So many types of promising technologies over the years have never realized commercialization, but that still does not dissuade those from getting into saddle and seeking to translate the technology to a commercial reality. Well, mRNA is a story where that happened, and it wasn't. It took a long time, and really the story involves two major classes of pioneers. One class of pioneer were the mRNA pioneers, those that believed in, just as I described, the mRNA technology, being utilized as a therapeutic or prophylactic once your cells produce these, specialty proteins. And then there was sort of another, class of pioneers that were the lipid pioneers, those that were developing lipids so that these lipids could deliver any payload or into a human cell. And there you have a lot of crossover, and there's a whole lot of literature, a lot of articles, very interesting articles written about the backstory and the interrelationship between some of these companies. We're not going to get into that today, but it does exist. But I think sort of the punchline here is that over the years, like you had CureVac, which is an mRNA pioneer. They were founded in 2000. They're probably the oldest, I think. They're like the OG of mRNA. They're like one of the original mRNA companies, founded in 2000. For mRNA, you had BioNTech, founded in 2008, Moderna, 2010, several other companies. I Translate Bio, which isn't on this list, but they were, I believe, founded in 2014, eventually acquired by Sanofi. Anyway, you had these mRNA pioneers working, diligently in the space. And in parallel to that, and also there was interrelationship, you had lipid pioneers, Tecmura, which had lipid technology. They were formed in 2005. They later became Arbutus. Acuitas, a lipid pioneer, founded in 2009. They were working on, they had partnerships with mRNA companies over the years. But up until this point, up until 2020, up until 2019, excuse me, around the time of at the time of the pandemic, none of these, none of these companies had an approved product. BioNTech had, I think, 12 or 14 candidates in the pipeline. Moderna had, I think, 18 candidates in the pipeline. CureVac had, I think, 12 or 14 candidates in the pipeline. There were no approvals. The pandemic came, and there was a need for a vaccine, a very strong need. I think no one can forget that. And because of the nature of the mRNA technology, being able to synthesize the mRNA sequence very quickly in a lab, produce a formulation, and provide it to regulators versus the old method, which involved growing a virus in chicken eggs and killing it, and the delays involved of synthesizing that was one factor. Moderna and Pfizer and BioNTech had this partnership. They were first in line to with their vaccine to address the COVID-19 pandemic. They were the first in line, and then they were via Operation Warp Speed. We saw an approval of those vaccines in incredible, like less than a year, and there was an emergency use authorization, but it was still just an unbelievable, at least short period of time when those were approved. And so at that moment, it not only did the world have its first vaccines, which were, said to be 95, 94, 95% effective, but you also had an ushering in of a new technology, a new platform technology, mRNA technology that had never before had any approvals. Now you have the major approval of these drugs that are being distributed and used worldwide. And really, I think there was, especially at that time, from a market perspective, you could see that with all the other indications and the promise of messenger RNA, really sort of exciting time. I don't think that's waned, but I think it was exciting because now you have approvals of the platform technology and then the ability to for all the other possible indications that could be addressed by mRNA technology. It's really an exciting time. It still is an exciting time to see the realization and translation of the promise of this technology. So if we move to 2021, so we had the approvals in December of 2020, and we're kind of talking about timelines. This is a sort of I'll call it a rough snapshot of what the IP and competitive landscape looked in 2021. There are certainly a number of companies, including those that are in this section here, the emerging mRNA companies that aren't mentioned here. But generally speaking, you have the major pioneers. You have Moderna, mRNA pioneer, BioNTech, mRNA pioneer, partnered with Pfizer. You have CureVac, mRNA pioneer. Arcturus was another company that was, an mRNA, lipid pioneer. You have Arbutus, who is a lipid pioneer, and you had Acuitas, which is a lipid pioneer. Acuitas had, relationships with BioNTech, with CureVac, number of other relationships over the years, and you sort of have this sort of landscape, a competitive landscape. I mentioned the approvals before, what their mRNA pipeline was, how many, their patent portfolio. But as of 2021, it was, and there were some oppositions, just a handful of patent challenges in Europe. There was a significant patent challenge. I think the most significant patent challenge as of 2021 involved Moderna and Arbutus. Arbutus had challenged, Moderna had challenged 3 Arbutus patents at the United States Patent and Trademark Office through inter-party review proceedings. There were 3 patents involved. Moderna was successful, canceling all claims of 1 patent. Another patent sort of split the claim set, and then a third patent completely survived the IPR, and that was the 069 patent, Arbutus's 069 patent. So as of 2021, that was sort of the landscape. This represents the publicly available information relating to the sales of each of the vaccines in 2021. Comirnaty, $36.7 billion, easily Pfizer's top selling product, and Spikevax, Moderna's really only and certainly top selling product at $17.7 billion. And so you had, in the course of just 2021, following the approvals, 50 billion, or over $50 billion in sales, and a collection of, and the status was, you have all these sales of these vaccines. They were based on technology that certainly BioNTech and Moderna, had rights to. They had patents directed to it. But then you have a lot of other market players and pioneers that also were involved in, in this technology that weren't on the market with these products. And I think the sort of it's for any patent litigator, would know, it's a recipe, an environment that's ripe for a patent litigation, at least one patent litigation to be filed. Well, we saw over the course since 2022, we've seen over, including in the US and abroad, we've seen over 30 disputes, all related to really sort of all centered around or relating to the sales of Spikevax and Comirnaty. So I can kind of walk through the timeline. The chart here, it is pretty complex. I did my best to sort of break it down. And the bubbles that are in this color, blue, are from the year 2022. And then you can just, and so forth, 2023, orange, 2024, light blue, 2025. The first lawsuit that was filed was in February of 2022. Arbutus and Genevant sued Moderna, and they sued them in the District of Delaware for infringement of 6 US patents. One of those patents was the one that had survived the IPR. So that suit was filed in 2022. Alnylam filed 2 lawsuits a few weeks later. One was against Moderna. The other was against Pfizer and BioNTech for patent infringement. And that was infringement of claims to Alnylam's, one of Alnylam's lipids. That was, really a few weeks after the Arbutus and Genevant lawsuit. Shortly thereafter, Acuitas, it was really the next day, Acuitas sued Arbutus and Genevant for declaratory judgment of non-infringement and invalidity for a number of Arbutus's patents. Later in that year, Pfizer and BioNTech sued CureVac for declaratory judgment of non-infringement. In the United States, this was in response to, or it followed, I should say, CureVac's suit against Pfizer and BioNTech in Germany for infringement. And so, you had Pfizer and BioNTech, suing CureVac in the United States for declaratory judgment of non-infringement of patents that were, counterparts, at least some of them were counterparts to the patents that were asserted against Pfizer and BioNTech in Germany. So that's just in 2022. And at the end of 2022, which I thought was really, sort of, very interesting, move, I guess, Moderna sued Pfizer and BioNTech, its direct competitor, in August of 2022 for infringement of three patents. So in the course of, you've had, the course of really eight or 9 months, really less than that, in the course of like 7 or 8 months, you really had the major sort of several of the major market players filing infringement lawsuits against one another. And if you kind of take a step back here, Moderna is the selling a product. Pfizer, BioNTech are selling a product. So they're, for the most part, they're going to be subject to the incoming, right? It costs a lot of money to file a lawsuit, a patent infringement lawsuit. It's a lot of investment. And, when you have, tens of billions of dollars being generated and your, potential of, having a percentage or, being awarded a percentage of that, of that number, it based on the evaluation of whoever's filing the lawsuit, it was obviously determined that it was, probably worth it. Going into the next year, 2023, we saw Arbutus and Genevant. They had sued Moderna for infringement. Well, they filed a lawsuit against Pfizer and BioNTech for infringement based on the sales of Comirnaty. Chromosome filed lawsuits as well in 2023 against each of the with using one patent. They asserted it against Moderna and Pfizer and BioNTech. That case settled. You had also in that year, Acuitas actually refiled. This is sort of the similar case. It's the same. They withdrew their suit in one jurisdiction. I believe it was SDNY, and then refiled it. Hold on a second here. Refiled it in the District of New Jersey. Second. And also of interest in 2023, Pfizer and BioNTech, there were 3 patents asserted against Moderna. Asserted 3 of its patents against Pfizer and BioNTech. Pfizer and BioNTech filed 2 IPRs, with PTAB, and ultimately was successful. Recently, Pfizer and BioNTech, the PTAB canceled all of the claims in both of those Moderna patents. That case is currently on appeal to the Federal Circuit, but that was a sort of key finding, or a key holding, or a key occurrence. Certainly a key holding by PTAB, but a key occurrence in this litigation between Pfizer and BioNTech and Moderna. 2024, you have the University of Pennsylvania, which licenses certain of its technology through a company called CellScript, licenses that technology to Pfizer and BioNTech. It's really the core of the technology relates to the utilization of pseudouridine, which is a modified RNA. The technology came out of the University of Pennsylvania. UPenn sued Pfizer and BioNTech for breach of contract. That case has settled. You also had Acuitas filing a correction of inventorship lawsuit against Alnylam. Obviously, previously Acuitas had filed a correction of inventorship lawsuit against CureVac. The allegations in each of these are that Acuitas believes that it's, certain of its people, while they were working, or, I believe while they were working at Acuitas, but also working with CureVac and, separately working with Alnylam, that Acuitas inventors should have been named on those patents. And by the way, those patents are the ones that are being asserted in these suits. And Acuitas's claim was that they should have ownership rights, co-ownership rights over at least some aspect of those asserted patents, which is interesting for a number of reasons, including Acuitas's relationship with Pfizer and BioNTech. We can talk about that a little bit later. So anyway, 2024, last year was very eventful. Also because GSK then became involved, where they filed lawsuits against Pfizer and BioNTech, and then also two separate lawsuits against Moderna. One of them related to Moderna's spike vaccine, and GSK is sued against Pfizer and BioNTech related to the Comirnaty vaccine, again, these COVID vaccines. But there's an additional lawsuit that GSK filed against Moderna for that was for Moderna's RSV vaccine. So Moderna had RSV, mRNA-based RSV product approved, and GSK's allegation is that the RSV formulation vaccine that infringes its patents. So I did my best to try to do a flyover. I encourage anyone who's really curious about any of these cases. Each one of them is its own story. To drill down. It's all out there. It's publicly available. The briefings, using Docket Navigator. That's really where you get the direct to source. But there's also a ton of articles that are sort of that have been written about this that you can also take advantage of. But I think the big sort of takeaways right now are that you have the some of these older cases, the originally filed cases, these like 1, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, that really are, especially this Arbutus, the first case that was filed. These early cases are now sort of maturing. They've made their way through the U.S. courts and are maturing. In fact, we have several trial dates that are coming up this year, including in the Arbutus and Moderna case. So we can talk a little bit about that in a second. But I think that's one takeaway. The other sort of big takeaway is remember that the vaccines. Remember that the approval for the vaccines was in at the end of 2020. So that's when sort of the vaccines were approved. I believe there was a good degree of ability to know what they were comprised of. In other words, what they were comprised of was sort of publicly available to some degree. That's really based on allegations that I've read in some of the papers. But a number of the patents, like if you look at the say Arbutus Genevant case that are filed against Moderna, cases that are filed against Moderna and also filed against Pfizer and BioNTech, there you'll see there are several sort of like original sort of older patents that predated the pandemic. And that includes that 069 patent I mentioned earlier. And there's a few others as well, existing patents that went through the patent office, got patent claims. And then, but also in addition to that, I'd say maybe 50% or around there of the other patents that are asserted by Arbutus and Genevant against Moderna and Pfizer and BioNTech were filed after allegedly the configuration of or the formulation of the vaccines was known. And so it's sort of like, for those who are not patent attorneys, that seems sort of counterintuitive. Like, if it's possible that you knew how the vaccine was configured, how could you file a patent application after you know that? Well, it's blocking and tackling for in patent law, where if you have an application that is older, that predated, certainly predates the pandemic, if it's alive, in other words, if you continue to file continuations and you're continuing to seek patents and branches from the tree, and it's still alive, you can go back to that disclosure and drop new claims and seek claims. And so that's, that's certainly absolutely 100%, proper and within the law. And I mean, there's some older, some sort of younger patents that are also being asserted in that case. All of the patents that Alnylam is asserting, has asserted against Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech were filed post-pandemic. And I believe almost all, if not all, of the patents that are being asserted by GSK in the Moderna and Pfizer and BioNTech case were also filed late. Those applications based on older portfolio were filed after. It's interesting. At the same time, if you have a good faith basis that your technology is being used by a market competitor, and then you're on file with an early application that has disclosure of your technology, and you believe it's being used by a third party, then you don't have a precise claim that has been granted, but you do have the basis for that, then you absolutely file for those patent claims, because if you believe in a good faith, have a good faith basis that a third party is using your technology, then you must do that. So I just think that's sort of an interesting sort of takeaway. You also had NIH, by the way. There were never any formal suits filed by NIH, but there was ownership issues. That case ended up settling. Moderna settled with NIH, and so did Pfizer. Pfizer and BioNTech. That was the U.S. Those were the U.S. patent litigations. In parallel to that, we had non-U.S. litigations abroad that were filed. A number of them. CureVac, Moderna. I mentioned the CureVac case earlier. BioNTech. Arbutus very recently filed a number of suits against Moderna abroad. Several of these have some outcomes. A mixture of findings. These seem to move fairly quickly as compared to the U.S. But to be honest with you, I think the fact that some of these U.S. cases are coming to trial this year, I think is good. I mean, usually it's like 3 or 4 years. Drilling down a little bit, just like profiles on these cases, the Arbutus Moderna case scheduled to go to trial in September. That's what the scheduling order currently says. Judge Norica, there are 6 asserted patents. District of Delaware, 6 asserted patents. At issue is infringement and invalidity. Those are the primary issues. Monetary damages, willful infringement, no injunction. Let me take a step back. One other major sort of point to be made here is that none of these entities, and there's one exception, but I mean, I'll just say generally, no one is seeking an injunction. So Arbutus and Genevin didn't say, court, we want damages, and Moderna has to stop selling Spikevax. Pfizer and BioNTech have to stop selling Comirnaty. Alnylam is not saying that. Moderna is not saying that, even though they may even have a stronger basis as a direct competitor to say, we want an injunction, Your Honor. During the pandemic, the public interest prong no one would bring that. And there's a PR rationale as well, I'm sure. But in their lawsuit, they are intentionally not, it's explicitly said they're not seeking an injunction. So it's all about the monetary damages, which it would be really a reasonable royalty for the most part, and then lost profit damages. I think Moderna and Pfizer BioNTech, certainly there's lost profits as part of the sort of damages profile of that case. I said there was one exception. The only exception is that GSK is for the Spikevax. In the Spikevax case, it is not seeking an injunction, but for the RSV case, it is seeking an injunction. So interesting. So here, Arbutus versus Moderna, the sort of key case, one of the key case happenings was Moderna filed an early 12b6 motion to dismiss certain claims under Section 1498. And that motion was denied. Under Section 1498, I have some of the language from the statute here. Whenever an invention covered by a patent is used or manufactured by or for the United States, the owner's remedy shall be by action against the United States in the United States Court of Federal Claims. And so what Moderna said was that, a significant portion of its vaccine sales were to the United States government for, to address the pandemic. And therefore, if those are infringing, it was doing it for the United States. And therefore, if those acts are infringing, Your Honor, Arbutus, for example, or Alnylam, they brought it up in both cases, their remedy is more appropriately by bringing suit against the U.S. in the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. And Your Honor, you should therefore dismiss, based on the clear statutory language, you should therefore dismiss those aspects of the claims now. And the court did not buy that argument at the 12b6 stage. I think you can read the opinion. You could say, well, that's a signal that they weren't going to take it up on summary judgment either, and the court's convinced that this doesn't apply. But I haven't seen a summary judgment motion yet, but that isn't to say that Moderna would not file one, and since that case is at a later stage. But again, this case is set for trial at the end of the year, and I think that will be that will be a big happening. One of the patents I mentioned earlier was the 069 patent. This was the patent that survived the IPR proceedings back in, I think it was 2019. I wanted to give you a sense about the types of patent claims that are at issue when we're talking about lipid nanoparticles. Here, fairly broad nucleic acid, could be any nucleic acid. Here, a cationic lipid, non-cationic lipid, which is a mixture. Here, it's a mixture of phospholipid and cholesterol. And then, conjugated lipid. And then there are fairly wide ranges. I say wide, I mean, there's ranges of molar percentage. And the allegation in the, particularly the case against Moderna, is that their formulation falls within these ranges, and that it doesn't matter what type of cationic lipid is, what particular structure they're using, what payload they're using, what phospholipid they're using, or what conjugated lipid they're using. Each one of those broad classes of lipids, those components fall within those ranges, and that's the allegation there. Alnylam, the Alnylam case against Moderna was Moderna won at the district court level following a favorable claim construction ruling and a motion to dismiss. That case is on appeal. I believe it has been argued, it's going to be argued before the Federal Circuit. But the Alnylam case versus Moderna, if you remember the chart with Alnylam, the vertical arrow, that case is currently on appeal. But the Alnylam versus BioNTech and Pfizer case is moving forward. The current trial date is scheduled for July 7th. It's another jury trial. These are all jury trials. This is before Judge Conley in the District of Delaware. There is an allegation of unenforceability in that case. I'm not sure where that will go, but that's partially based on, the allegation that having knowledge of the formulation and then drawing claims to inappropriately broaden the scope of your patent rights is wrong and causes it's a misuse of the patent. That has not been adjudicated. That argument has not been adjudicated yet. Similarly, monetary damages, and again, no injunction. We talked about the temporal point about when the when the asserted patents were filed. One of the asserted patents was recently voluntarily dismissed, but in any case, this is, this one is going to be, looks like it's going to be going to trial fairly soon. And by the way, in the Pfizer BioNTech and case against Alnylam, and then also in its case against Arbutus, Pfizer and BioNTech did not assert the Section 1498, motion or rights, which they certainly sold quite a bit of product to the United States, but they're not seeking to stand behind that. At least not in these cases, seeking to stand behind that that argument. We also have the CureVac case, the declaratory judgment case. It's now in the Eastern District of Virginia. BioNTech, Pfizer versus CureVac. That also has a September trial date. 10 asserted patents. The infringement and validity of those patents are at issue. Again, declaratory judgment. And here, Acuitas, remember Acuitas? Acuitas sought, a motion to intervene in that case and stay the proceedings because Acuitas claimed that it had rights and ownership in certain of the it says asserted patents, but the patents, the CureVac patents at issue. In other words, the patents at issue and CureVac saying, it's a DJ action. So CureVac said, well, their defense was we don't infringe. I mean, I'm sorry, that BioNTech and Pfizer infringe. Acuitas is saying, well, we have a partial ownership over those patents that are being asserted in counterclaims. And, that was sort of the basis of that. And then Acuitas filed a separate suit, and we saw that on the chart as well, for correction of inventorship. And in that case, there was a settlement, and there's a settlement of the correction of inventorship case, and then bottom line is there were certain of the patents that CureVac withdrew. 3 of the patents that CureVac withdrew from its case against Pfizer and BioNTech. It seems like because of that suit, and I guess it was probably any of the patents that Acuitas, I'd have to double check, but I think it was probably any of the patents that Acuitas felt that it had ownership rights over. I think maybe CureVac, I think CureVac withdrew probably all of them. So now the case that's going to trial, there are 7 asserted patents in that case. And then the sort of, I'd say, it's a big case because it's the 2 direct competitors, Moderna versus BioNTech and Pfizer. There's no trial date set. We talked about it. The case is stayed. It was initially stayed pending the outcome of the IPRs, the 2 IPRs, because it was 3. Remember, there are 3 patents. BioNTech and Pfizer IPR 2 of those. So the case was stayed pending that outcome. And then when the result came, where it was, cancellation of claims for unpatentability for 2 of those 2 patents, it was stayed further, pending appeal. And Moderna has filed, an appeal for, has filed appeal to overturn the PTAB's ruling on those 2, those 2 judgments. And I also add something like an interesting happening in the case. Moderna had, before the litigation started, so I guess it was probably in 2020, Moderna issued a patent pledge. No one else issued a patent pledge, but Moderna issued a patent pledge, and their patent pledge, again, before the litigations, was we will not enforce our patents basically against anybody in the space during the pandemic. Like whatever that meant during the pandemic, they said we won't do that. Then these lawsuits started. I'm not saying it's cause and effect necessarily. It's just temporarily the lawsuit started, and Moderna partially withdrew its pledge it maintained its pledge for low 92 low and middle income countries. In other words, they're not going to sue someone in those low and middle income countries for infringement. And but for any other competitor and any other strong market, essentially the deal's off. Like we're not gonna have this pledge continue perpetually. So I guess the pandemic ended, I guess, at some point in the middle of 2020, and staying true to that, which you got to give Moderna some credit for this. They're saying, consistent with its pledge, it's not going to seek damages from its direct competitors for activities occurring before March 8th, 2022. I guess March 8th, 2022 was, I guess that's when they pulled the pledge. I have to really double check on that. There's a lot of information here, but so they're not going to do that. And then they're not seeking damages for, sales to the 92 low and middle income countries. And they're also, again, not seeking an injunction. So it's interesting. It's a whole nother probably topic of discussion in terms of why Moderna made the patent pledge in the first place, and whether they, what effect, sort of like a retrospective, that would be a good read. Really, this is kind of a summary, which is there are some, key, of the key exposure issues. You have injunction, again, none sought against the COVID vaccines, reasonable royalty that's going to be based on a hypothetical negotiation. What will be important there, I think, for the Arbutus cases, as well as the Acuitas cases, is sort of one aspect of evidence to evaluate. The experts will evaluate is, what do your current licensing deals look like? What does a royalty look like? What do your milestones look like? That will all go into the evaluation of where to set the bar for what a reasonable royalty is. Lost profits is but for infringement, the sale would have been made. Moderna probably has a stronger argument than the other players that are filing suits in terms of but for infringement. That certainly would be litigated. But the basis for the calculation is $100 billion in combined sales. So even a 5% royalty granted to any of these entities, is very, very significant. We have, we talked about the exposure, managing exposure. We also didn't touch on indemnification, but let me just kind of get there real quick here. Hold a second. So this is kind of the exposure landscape. You got liabilities coming in, potential, royalties, mitigating with 1498. That's Moderna, Pfizer and BioNTech, settling with UPenn for $467 million, Pfizer and BioNTech paying $791 million to NIH, Moderna paying $400 million to NIH. You've got the incoming potential for, royalties. You've got Moderna's potential for returning, getting lost profits. You've got an indemnification issue, which I don't know what the details are. A lot of it is not publicly available, but Acuitas and Pfizer and BioNTech have a, Acuitas licenses a lipid to Pfizer and BioNTech for Comirnaty, and there's an indemnification provision that Acuitas has invoked in the suits against Arbutus, and then also CureVac, and then, and Alnylam against Arbutus and Alnylam to support its allegations of standing. And that wasn't successful in the Arbutus and Genevan case, by the way. But in any event, you can just kind of put yourself in the shoes of the two key market players that are going to be affected. And I guess Acuitas or any other vendor would be affected by the results of this as well, these cases as well. So just, very quick summary, and I'll leave some time for questions. We had over 30 known disputes. I mean, these are disputes that have been, you don't know what phone calls and email and what people are, doing in terms of settling things behind the scenes, but there's 30 known disputes in the US and abroad since 2022. There are currently 17 cases that are pending, 10 in the US, 7 abroad. 3 trials are scheduled for 2025 this year. And there are, 9, lower court rulings that have occurred, 4 in the US, 5 abroad. There's been no final judgment in the US. If we're talking about the US, none of those lower court rulings have gone up and through the federal circuit all the way through yet, except for, and it's not on these calculations, and it's before 2022, but the Arbutus IPR, the 069 patent, the Arbutus IPRs against Moderna, that did go up through the federal circuit, and those rulings were affirmed. What is at stake for the litigants? From the maker side, certainly it's the revenues that have been generated on the sales. The liability for that, whatever those numbers are, that's sort of what's at stake. Jury trials, unpredictable. There's risks there for the makers, but there's also risks for the patent holders. Arbutus, for example, it does a lot of licensing with Genevant, and that's a major asset to them. They're asserting it anytime. It's not uncommon. Anytime that you assert a patent in a patent litigation, you're putting it at risk. But certainly there is a risk there. There's risk for everybody. And in the district court action, there, like in IPRs, the Rule 112, the 112 written description enablement requirements were not at issue. That you couldn't raise those in the IPRs. It was just obviousness and anticipation. But we're in a district court litigation. Those issues are expanded. So maybe there's more risk there. Certainly, leave it to the litigants and the parties to evaluate that. But in big picture, these are kind of what's at stake for the litigants. Pretty straightforward. The effects on the space, I'd say that market players, whoever's operating the space, you want to track it. You want to see if there's a lipid that you might be using that's covered by one of these patents and it's invalidated. That's great. You're under the safe harbor now, but it'd be nice to know if you can continue to use it going forward. You can also see the behavior of some of these parties, their willingness to file lawsuits. That's helpful. It's a great opportunity to innovate and build assets. It's a mess. Some people look at it like this is a mess. I don't want to do an FTO. I don't want to deal with it. Therefore, I want to develop my own lipid or my own formulation, and that's fantastic. And that's when you can really build assets. I think overall, this technology will persevere. I think it's a great platform technology. It holds a lot of promise. So I think in the scheme of things, it's not going to destroy the space, the outcome of these cases, or anything like that. I think you've already seen a lot of innovation. This has spurred a lot of independent innovation, and so I don't think there are any major concerns over what effect this will have in the overall platform technology of mRNA and particularly LNP, which has a broad range of cargo that it could deliver. So I'll end there and open up for a few minutes for any questions that folks may have.
Thank you, Dan. We do have a few questions for you from our listeners. Our first question is, how do you approach FTO searching and analysis in the space?
Okay, so yeah, freedom to operate analysis it's very important, I think, for anyone who's working with a candidate. They have something that they want to move forward with. It's I'd say crucial to evaluate the freedom to operate of that formulation, including on any of the lipid components that are being used, to do that as early as possible. The last thing you want is to be far down the road and realize that you've got a problem with with a patent or even an application. And so what we advise is you really you want to get that cleared as soon in the process as possible. Some clients like to take an iterative approach. That's fine. I think it's a comfort level, I think, with a lot of clients as to what they're concerned with. But in general, I think you really want to confront that head on early, because when you do that, it's 9 times out of 10, you're going to find a solution. And then you sort of clear that risk, right? You sort of mitigate. You're never going to fully clear a risk like that, but you can really mitigate it if you confront it very early on in the process. Whereas if you ignore it and then you start, go through the process, you're getting ready to go in the clinic, diligence from a third-party investor, for example, starts kicking the tires, and then up, we've got a problem. Like, what is this application? This application is, they got really broad claims. Like, what's going on? You really you want to confront it early, and it can be intimidating looking at the complexity of the space and all the different market players, but you work with your experienced patent counsel, and there's a path there. Sometimes it's straightforward, sometimes it may not be so easy, but there's a path there, and you can clear it and sort of move on with the important work of supporting your team to get that candidate in the clinic, and then you're out raising money and that kind of thing. So it's a great question.
Great. Our second question, how have the rulings so far impacted patent validity and enforceability?
I'd say, again, with we covered this, I think to a degree. I think the key rulings in terms of patentability were with respect to the two Moderna patents that were canceled at the PTO via the Pfizer and BioNTech IPRs. I mean, that those two patents were found to be unpatentable. The claims of those patents were found to be unpatentable, and so that's sort of a definitive. Okay, these are unpatentable. Now it's on appeal, so they could be reversed. But I'd say at this stage, that was probably the most definitive of any of the patents that are being asserted. You also had the IPR that predated the litigation activity, the Arbutus patent that survived the 069 patent that went up all the way through the federal circuit. That was some scrutiny that patent went under. That was sort of definitive for the most. And then you had a claim construction of the Alnylam patents in the case that Moderna had against Alnylam, which had a certain interpretation which allowed Moderna to have clear-cut summary judgment of non-infringement. So the scope of that patent was adjudicated. That's on appeal. So it's really a lot of it's in flux. I don't think there's, other than the 069 patent, and again, that was just on 102, 103. That's not to say the 069 patent is bulletproof forever and ever. I mean, there are the issues that get brought up in these other cases, but that was sort of the most definitive one. And then I think the tier then goes to the two that were just canceled, the two Moderna patents that claims are just canceled, sets of claims just canceled, and then the claim construction ruling on the Alnylam versus Moderna case.
Fantastic, thank you. And we have one final question. What impact do these cases have on the mRNA space going forward?
Yeah, I think we sort of covered this as one part of my last slide. Yeah, I mean, again, it's you if you're operating the space, you definitely want to know, you want to keep apprised of what's going on. And you also want to know, like, are there any patents that are at issue in these cases that relate to me? So I think that's probably the first thing. Otherwise, it's just a spectator sport. But if you think that any of the patents that are being asserted in these cases relate to your program, you really want to take a closer look at it, and then monitor, and then work with your patent counsel to evaluate, okay, what happens if they settle? What happens if it's invalidated? What happens if it's not found invalid? What does that do to us? How does that affect us? And then, the other things I touched on, you can also take an opportunity to innovate, come up with something new. But overall, I think this platform technology is here to come, and I think there'll be more approvals down the road beyond vaccines that this has application to oncology and other indication areas. I think we're going to see some approvals that utilize either LNP and or mRNA, and then it'll move forward regardless of this scrum that we're seeing here right now in this point in time.
Fantastic, thank you. Those are all of our questions. Dan, thank you very much for your time today. We know your expertise will be a valuable resource for our audience.